All right, today we are going to make pasta dough. So this is very, very simple. I've got 1.5 cups of all-purpose flour. Pasta dough is also made really good with other flours. If you have semolina flour, it makes wonderful pasta dough, or double zero flour. I'm just going to use all-purpose because you're most likely to have that at home. And it is just going to be your regular noodles. They're a little bit doughy and chewy when we cook them because I like to undercook mine just a little bit. We'll show you that after we make this dough though. We'll let it rest, we'll roll it out, and then we'll make it. So the plan for today is very simple. I've got 1.5 cups of all-purpose flour. I've got about 1/2 teaspoon of salt. And then what I'm going to do is make a well in the middle, and I'm going to add my eggs. I've got 2 eggs. They're just plain large eggs from the grocery store, and I'm going to stir this together. So very, very simple. There are pictures that you can see. Sometimes I follow a lot of like chefs on Instagram, and whenever they make pasta and they're making it for a whole restaurant, they'll have like a pile of flour, this wide, and this huge well, and all these eggs cracked in the middle and making on their table. I always think that's fun to see. So when you stir this together, it's obviously going to be strangely chunky. And I'm going to add about a tablespoon of water at a time. And if you have never had homemade pasta, it is just amazing. I don't care too much about pasta from a box. Like, it doesn't do much for me in terms of taste or flavor or texture or anything. I'll use it because it's cheap and easy. But homemade pasta, it's hard to resist. So like I said, about a tablespoon at a time. I'm just wanting my dough to come together, and sometimes when I stick my hand in there, I always say you should stick your hand in there. I'm going to stir it and then stick my hand in there again. Using your hands, it's just like making bread dough, when you use your hands, you can tell a little bit better if something's coming together than if you're just eyeballing it. So I always ask you to start with just a couple tablespoons of water, because you can always add more. But it's just like when you're making pie dough. If you add too much water, then you've got to add flour again, and then you really just kind of gunk up the texture of your whole thing. So just add a little bit of water at a time. What we're doing right now, if you've been in baking and pastry, you'll recognize some of these terms. We're going to develop the gluten. Flour has glutenin and gliadin in it, and when you add liquid and mix, you develop gluten. So what I'm doing right now is developing gluten. Gluten is what makes breads or anything with the flour in it. With flour as that main ingredient, it's going to make it plastic and elastic. Plastic means when I do this, it's going to come back. Elastic means when I do this, it's going to go back. So I clearly have not developed my gluten all the way. You can also do this in a food processor. If you have a food processor at home, I think stuff like this is just more fun to make by hand, but you can do it in a food processor. So what we're going to do is, and see, I almost did that to myself, where I'm going to need a little bit of flour now. I added just a touch too much water, I can feel it. Again, if you've been in baking and pastry and you've seen us knead dough before, we talk about how it should be tacky but not sticky. If it is sticky, it means it's sticking to your hands. Tacky would be basically like you could probably stick 2 things together with it. So if you've ever hung a poster or something in your room, you want to ruin your walls, pre-command strips, we used sticky tack. It was this little, almost looked like bubble gum, but it worked really well for sticking things to the wall. So what I'm going to do now is just knead this, and I want to knead it until it's smooth. Kneading dough is a beautiful way to expend some energy, because in the end, you have dough. You guys have probably heard me say it before. Either clean or make bread. If you're angry or frustrated or have a lot of emotions going on, clean or make bread. Because in the end, you have a clean house and or fresh baked bread, or noodles in this case. I like to make these noodles. This is my every Friday after Thanksgiving thing, usually, to go with our turkey and noodles. And then you do not have to have a pasta roller. We'll show you that here in a little bit. If you want. Earlier I talked about it being plastic and elastic. So plastic is when I dent it, it comes back. Elastic is when I do this, then it comes back also. just like an elastic band, you know, for your hair or something like that. I also don't want there to be any big chunks in there. I can feel that I've really worked out the chunks. And then while you're kneading, just make sure that you don't, I've seen people knead, you know, kind of like this. You want to make sure that you're turning it really every time. Sometimes I use one hand, sometimes two. So you want to make sure that you actually turn it. You're working it in different directions so that you get the inside to the outside. You'll feel it come together. There's just something about doughs that you really feel them come together, and then suddenly I can feel where it's ready. It's almost like poofy, and then if I over knead it, it will start getting like tough again. So at this point, it's beautiful. It's a little bit poofy, like I said before. I'm just gonna put it in my bowl. I usually like to put just a tiny bit of oil in my bowl, and then I'm gonna put it in my bowl, and I'm gonna let it rest for a bit. If you are at school, then you would just let it rest, and I'm just gonna turn it over. You would just let it rest, and then while you set up your pasta roller, at home, maybe set it to the side and you can roll it out later. So here we go. And back with some rested pasta dough. The reason that we let a dough rest is because of that gluten again. So what that's going to do is, if it's not rested enough, so like maybe cinnamon roll dough, once I pull it out after it's fermented and I punch it down, if I'm trying to roll out a dough and just keep springing back so I can't even work with it, then that just means it needs to rest longer. So what we're going to do here is I have my whole ball of pasta. This actually makes a lot of pasta. It shows you also why pasta is so cheap in the store. What I usually do is divide my dough into thirds, and then I roll out a third at a time. Now we have this cool little pasta cranker at school, so those of you who are cooking in person will be doing this. Those of you who are at home, if you don't have this, maybe you have a pasta maker that is a KitchenAid attachment. So our mixers also have pasta crankers. They're called pasta sheeters, not crankers. But maybe you have that, and if you don't, hopefully you have a rolling pin. If you don't have a rolling pin, you can use a can. I've seen people use like a wine bottle or an olive oil bottle. You could use that instead. So if you're at school, then we are going to put this on the lowest number, and the lowest number is the biggest sheet, the thickest sheet of dough. So since I have this, I want to have it started on the thickest sheet. And if you had one of these at home or the KitchenAid style at home, you would do the same thing. So I'm gonna flour that just a little bit. Remember I had this in oil, so it's a little bit sticky. And then this works the best if you have two people, but since you're at home, I'm gonna show you with just one. And then I'm just going to crank this through. And what I'm gonna do in the beginning, you can see that it's still like a little bit almost kind of chunky in the middle. For the first 5 or 6 times, I take this pasta and I fold it into thirds, and I am going to, you just do a letter fold, and then I'm going to kind of fan it out a little bit flat again, and then I'm going to run it through the dough sheeter again. And you'll notice a difference as you're working, like it's already smoother and stretchier than it was, which is obviously a good thing. That's what we want it to do. And then I'm just gonna fan it out again. And I keep doing flour because I'm also kind of bringing the outside to the inside. I probably could have stood to flatten that out a little bit before I put it through, because it almost looks like stuck bubble gum when you do that. Okay, so it's getting stronger. That's good. I'm gonna flatten this out just a little bit more this time. And like I said, I do this 5 or 6 times before I even move on. If I were doing this with a rolling pin, I would do the same. I would roll it out, I would letter fold it, and then I would roll it out with my rolling pin again. The reason that I like these is because it does just give me, I can usually get it thinner with the pasta sheeter. I still should have flattened it out a little bit more. Okay. And sometimes I fan it a little bit too. I feel like I just need a little bit more flour. Okay, so we're just gonna be running it through this. Like I said, if you're using a rolling pin at home, still do the same. It just makes your pasta a little bit stronger. And if you're gonna boil something, then you obviously need it to be, kind of strong. It's pretty nice and and stretchy. It's not chunky at all anymore. So I think I can pretty much smooth that out by just rolling it. So I'm gonna toss it through this thickness one more time just to get a little bit more flour on the outside, because remember earlier I said I added a little bit too much water. And then I'm just going to change the thickness, and I just do it one at a time usually. Sometimes I get really daring and do 2 at a time, but not always. And I'm just going to crank this through. So you're going to be doing this at home also. You can just do this, like I said, with a rolling pin if you don't have any of these little gadgets. And then after this, I'll show you how to cut it into noodles. So in class, what we usually do is make homemade lasagna with homemade mozzarella. So we would just take this, and this would be our lasagna noodle. But obviously, we're not going to do all those steps from home. So what I aim for, if you're going to use a pasta cranker, I aim for a 6 or a 7. I like my pasta a little bit on the thicker side, almost like noodles you would use for beef and noodles. The bigger the number, the thinner it is on my pasta roller. So the story goes that if you are going to marry someone in Italy, the wife has to prove herself by rolling pasta thin enough, of course by hand, not on a cranker, that you can see through. So I don't know if you guys can see that on your screen, but you can see through the pasta. You can see my hand behind it. So it's like proving your worth as a wife. So point, I have my sheet rolled out, and then I got a little over to the side, and then you guys can cut this with a pizza cutter, or at school we have little crankers that I'm going to show. Okay, so here I am back with this, and all I do to use this cutter on this pasta maker is take the handle and move it to the one that I want it to be on, and then I am going to drop this in. I'm actually going to cut this first. I bet that would make me nervous. So now I put the handle on here. We'll see if it stays. And then I am just going to drop it in there, crank it through, and I'm going to catch this one on the other side. And then I have fettuccine noodles. So these, I have like a pasta drying rack, but you probably don't have one of those at home. So you could lay these however you like to dry. Some people will lay them like just out flat. I usually like to do mine in nests, and then I just cook them in nests. I'm noticing that my machine's not cutting very well though. So I'm going to separate these. You could have done this with a pizza cutter as well. If yours are a little thicker, that's totally fine. And then I usually nest mine just because when we're making pasta, we're making a lot of it. And you can make pasta ahead of time too. So if you ever go to the farmer's market, they usually have cool flavors of pasta there too. So then I just kind of take it and twirl it. And then I'm going to set that on parchment and let it dry. Or if I was ready, I could just cook it right now. So when you cook pasta, you want to make sure you put it in already boiling water. So you want that pasta to be tough, like we developed the gluten, so that when we drop it in the water, it's not going to fall apart. And then I'm just going to make a really simple sauce to go with it. So what I'm going to do here, I have a boiling water, and I'm going to drop my little nest in there. And then once it starts cooking, it will start to separate. I'm going to go grab some tongs real quick too. And those noodles are separated from the nest. I'm going to go grab some tongs, and then this cooks for just about 3 minutes because you don't cook fresh pasta nearly as long as it's going to stretch. Okay, so what I'm looking for in these, I could even take one out and try it if I wanted to. Like I said, I cook mine for about 3 minutes, and then you want them to be al dente. Al dente is what you'll see in a lot of pasta recipes. Al dente means firm to the bite. Dente, tooth, firm to the tooth. You're not supposed to cook pasta until it's like all mushy. So it's supposed to be firm still, to have a little bit of chew to it. This is one of my, I like this one, and then another one of my favorite pasta shapes is the cavatappi, which is the tube noodles that are also spiraled. They're so good, I love those. So what I'm going to do, because I'm going to cook more pasta in this water, is I'm just going to lift my pasta out of the water and put it in that bowl. In this pan, I'm just going to go really simple and good. So I'm just going to use some chopped onions that are dry. That's totally fine for right now. I'm going to use garlic powder. I'm also kind of using stuff that you might be more likely to have at home. And it really doesn't take that much butter. You could brown the butter a little bit if you wanted to. Like I said, I like mine chewy. They've been in there for a few minutes. I'm going to pull. I'm only doing this because I just want to reuse the same boiling water. At a restaurant, if they're cooking pasta, what they'll do is they put the pasta down in this like little colander thing. It almost looks like what you would drain the pasta with. And then they have their boiling water just boiling all the time. And then they can just pull, drop it just like a frying basket. That works really well for a place that's doing a lot of pasta. So I'm just going to shake that up a little bit. Like I said, it really doesn't take that much butter. This will be enough butter for a lot of things. I feel like it's less butter than pasta or something. Some fresh Parmesan cheese would be really good on it. If you had maybe some peanut, you could do that. Several of you picked carbonara as one of your egg recipes, and I commented that carbonara is so good. So if you want to really get fancy and delicious, make some carbonara. So this, I'm just going to pour a little bit over the top of the noodles. I'm going to turn that heat off.